From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South, and I am CNE Gray. The number of Palestinians killed by Israeli defense forces has risen to 10, and hundreds of others have been wounded as Gaza begins its march of return protests. Tens of thousands of Palestinians are converging on 6 locations at the Gaza-Israeli border as part of the mass demonstrations against Israeli occupation. According to the Palestinian Health Ministry, hundreds of people have been injured since Friday morning by tank shelling, gunfire and tear gas. IDF Chief of Staff Gadi El-Sankot told local media ahead of the protest that Israel has created a sniper task force consisting of over 100 sharpshooters to counter the demonstration. El-Sankot stressed that Israeli soldiers will use a lot of force to prevent any possible infiltration by Palestinians into Israeli territory from the Gaza Strip. Despite this danger, the Palestinians refuse to back down.
Today is a turning point for our people in our history of national struggle and fight, in our way to freedom and return. Today our people from the whole nation, from Gaza, from the West Bank, from the occupied lands in 1948, and from other countries, are launching this new phase.
Our correspondent in Cairo, Yasbel Berlin, has more.
On Friday, thousands of Palestinians marched to the border between the Gaza Strip and Israel as part of the mass demonstrations against Israeli occupation. According to the latest reports, the Israeli forces have fired against the demonstrators and at least 7 people have been killed so far. Hundreds are reported to have been injured. Local media has said that Israel used tanks to shell the border and deployed more than 100 snipers. Hamas has said they feared Israel would use repressionary tactics, but also they called for peace to avoid any escalation of the violence. In recent weeks, several demonstrations have taken place to commemorate Land Day and to remember the 6 Palestinians killed in 1976 by Israeli forces as they protested against the expropriation of their land.
The government of Ecuador has announced the creation of a special commission to deal with escalating violence on the border with Colombia. The decision was made during an emergency meeting between the President of the National Assembly and government representatives. The commission will observe and analyze movements near the border with the hope of quashing any illegal activity. This initiative comes after 2 journalists and their driver were kidnapped in the area.
The National Assembly has not ignored nor minimized the severity of the situation. This is why we have called for this meeting in response to the citizens' demand and the necessity of information.
A group of intellectuals, social activists and artists have written an open letter demanding that the government of Ecuador restore Julian Assange's freedom of expression. On Wednesday, Ecuador cut off internet access for the founder of WikiLeaks, who's been inside the Ecuadorian embassy in London, access to a telephone and the right to receive visitors. They write, if the Ecuadorian government does not cease in its unworthy action, it too will become an agent of prosecution rather than the valiant nation that stood up for freedom. The National Electoral Council of Venezuela, or the CNE, has approved the final registry for the upcoming presidential and legislative elections that will be held on May 20th. More than 20 million people will elect a new president, while almost 19 million people will choose their representatives in the legislative councils. For the presidential elections, all citizens of legal age are enrolled in the CNE, even those abroad. However, for the legislative councils, people who live abroad will be exempted from voting. Foreigners who have lived in Venezuela for more than 10 years are also eligible to vote. Current Brazilian President Michel Temer's chances at the upcoming elections are rather slim. His approval rating has dropped to just 3% amid a series of corruption scandals.
In the streets of Brazil, it's difficult to find anyone actually supporting Michel Temer, a president who came to power following a coup against former leftist leader Dilma Rousseff.
It's lousy for Brazil, and it's the people who get hurt. Unfortunately, he's only interested in ruining lives of the poor.
They're a gang of criminals, bandits, scoundrels.
After almost 2 years of tenure, the president has been taken to court twice for being linked to corruption, money laundering, and leading a criminal organization. Until now, investigations have been annulled, though there are indications that he has purchased votes from lawmakers.
They buy votes by giving money to parliamentarians. They have granted privileges to the military. They allowed the censorship of works of art to appease the evangelical parties. They wrote off the debts of millionaire businessmen. And they are delivering all that is necessary to remain in power while prioritizing foreign capital and banks.
Having a corrupt president in power who will do anything to save himself has had serious consequences for the people.
They carried out the coup to put an end to investigations, to make corruption more open, and, according to global research organizations, Brazil has never been as corrupt as it is now under the government.
This government has caused a number of social problems. Unemployment has increased significantly. Levels of violence have also increased. The number of people living on the streets has risen. A second major problem is the dismantling of the state through privatization, the cuts in public policy, the lack of attention by the state for people facing the greatest of burdens. And finally, we have this issue of disorganization with regards to internal politics.
Temer has an approval rating of 3% according to the polls and still aspires to be a candidate in the upcoming elections. The immunity of the office would allow him to continue to avoid investigations, but now that his closest allies have been incarcerated, it seems inevitable that a third complaint against the president will come about.
3 of President Temer's associates were arrested on Thursday in connection with another corruption scandal. Our correspondent in Brasilia, Adriana Rebreño, has more.
Police arrested 3 people from President Michel Temer's closer entourage as part of an investigation into whether the president signed a decree that benefited the port operating company Rodrimar in exchange for bribes. Among those arrested are the lawyer Jose Yunes and retired Colonel João Batista Lima, both of them well-known friends of President Temer. The former minister Wagner Rossi was also arrested. Between 1999 and 2000, Rossi was the president of the São Paulo State Docks Company, CODESP, which manages the port of Santos in São Paulo, the biggest port in Brazil. Police also arrested Antonio Celso Greco, one of Rodrimar's partners, who is now at the center of the investigation, which is linked, of course, to President Michel Temer. As part of this investigation, the court ordered access to President Temer's banking records. In the next few days, the prosecutors may file a third corruption allegation against the president because, let's not forget, he already managed to evade 2 previous cases against him. Recently, Temer has expressed an interest in running in Brazil's coming presidential elections, even though he knows that his already low popularity could go even lower after this investigation.
We'll take a short break now, but join us again after this look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting.
A man who inspired a continent.
Era un hombre demasiado humilde, igual que uno, y andaba junto con uno.
A current idea on every corner of his town.
En Chávez está una lectura originalísima de nuestra realidad.
Hugo Chavez, a man with dreams. On Sunday, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. Former Ecuador President Rafael Correa interviewed Brazil's former president Luiz Ignacio Lula da Silva on Thursday. The two spoke about the current state of Latin America's democracy. Lula explained a flawed justice system is trying to prevent him from running for the presidency in October.
In Brazil, there is a pact between the media, the courts, the public prosecutors, and the police. First, they criminalize people in the media. And only once the person has been condemned, they go through the legal process. In my case, the media lied, and that lie was turned into a police investigation. The investigation was sent to the prosecutor's office and led to false charges, which were accepted by the judge, who passed a verdict, which was an even bigger lie. Then it went to a second court, which consolidated the lie. The whole thing was a lie, because they have to stop Lula being a candidate for the Brazilian presidency.
And Costa Rica goes to the polls on Sunday for the presidential elections. It is a closely watched fight after a gay marriage controversy pitted a Christian preacher against the ruling party candidate. And polls show the frontrunners are tied neck and neck.
Indecision, absenteeism, and a lack of political identity can be the words used to describe this election.
Political players are weak due to the difficulties they face representing the people. There's a growing gap between citizens and political parties.
Now that the parties have held their campaign closing ceremonies, many topics have been left undebated, such as the growing concerns about human rights.
We've opposed same-sex marriage from the start. We haven't budged like some other candidates back in the first round.
Fabricio Alvarado denies accusations that he's exploiting people's religious beliefs to his own advantage.
They've said we're using religion to win votes, but we aren't. We've only told Costa Ricans we plan to be of benefit to everyone, even those who belong to other religions.
In another closing ceremony in San Jose, Acción Ciudadana stressed concepts that matter to the country, both inside and out.
People want to hear peace, democracy, respect for both human rights and the environment when they hear the name Costa Rica.
Many political parties and social movements support Carlos Alvarado and his team.
It's not like any other moment in history when you have all of these political parties trying to help Costa Rica.
The Supreme Electoral Committee officially announced the electoral blackout that comes into effect on Thursday.
We intend to stop political discussion so that voters can reflect on their decision for a final time.
Both parties are neck and neck according to the polls, but we will only know for sure on Sunday, April 1st.
Every Peruvian president to have served over the last 28 years has either been to prison or has been investigated for corruption. According to the polls, the vast majority of the population believe entrenched corruption in the Andean nation has undermined democracy.
Marches against corruption are becoming more frequent, and they've been growing in size.
I'm realizing what I live. I'm seeing the country in which I live. It's unfortunate and it's harming Peru.
We lack a good education, good health, because they are busy filling their pockets. We want the congressional rats to get out immediately.
In 1993, Alberto Fujimori staged a coup, saying the country's dire economy had to be dealt with. He changed the constitution in favor of business-friendly policies. Commentators say that put economic power in the hands of the political class and reduce the role of public institutions. Surveys show that stoked distrust in politicians.
Governments respond to large companies and large monopolies and have neglected their duty to meet the needs of people, health and education. Roads are bad, people do not receive state benefits, and that's why people are unhappy with this so-called democracy.
Operation Car Wash is an ongoing criminal investigation by Brazil into money laundering and corruption, and it unmasked many high-ranking officials, including former presidents Pedro Pablo Kuczynski and Alan Garcia. Ex-President Alejandro Toledo has an extradition order, and another former leader, Ollanta Humala, is in prison for corruption.
It doesn't end with corruption. This is a system of influence that advantages 12 power groups and 24 transnational corporations, and their armies of lawyers, specialists, and consultants who end up in ministries or who go forth and buy the will of the Congress people.
In the streets, people shout, "May they all go," as progressive groups call for urgent electoral reform and a new constitution that will see to the needs of Peruvians and not just those in power.
The General Secretary of the Vietnamese Communist Party, Wu Phong Tong, is on a 3-day official visit to Cuba. Cuban President Raul Castro received him in Havana on Thursday. Both countries promised to strengthen their ties during the meeting. Havana and Hanoi established diplomatic relations in 1960, shortly after the Cuban Revolution. Wu Fong Tong awarded President Castro with the highest Vietnamese distinction. And our correspondent Laura Prada has more from Havana.
Hello, yes, nice to greet you. Yesterday was distinguished the President Raúl Castro with the medal, the Order Golden Star of Vietnam, the highest distinction the government Vietnamese gives. This order was given by the General Secretary of the Communist Party of Vietnam, who is visiting the island. Yesterday was his second day of visit. And in this activity, he was officially received by President Raúl Castro, and important agreements were signed between Cuba and Vietnam, especially in areas related to agriculture, construction, environmental, technological, and communications, among others. Yesterday also, the General Secretary was received at the University of Havana, where he shared with the students, and he received the honoris causa, a doctorate in political sciences. Today's agenda is also interesting because he will be sharing with friendship groups and other authorities at the Cuban Institute of Friendship with the Peoples. And in the afternoon afterwards, he will be leaving to Santiago de Cuba, where he will pay tribute to José Martí and Fidel Castro. This is all I have for now, but we'll keep in touch.
Thank Laura Prada for that report. The Prime Minister of Dominica, Roosevelt Skerrit, has announced that he has secured over $100 million from the World Bank to mitigate the damage from last year's Hurricane Maria. Out of that, $40 million will be allocated for home reconstruction. Skerrit says the plan is to construct 5,000 new homes with the funds. When the Category 5 Hurricane Maria struck Dominica, it destroyed 20% of the homes and severely damaged another 40%. Award-winning Mexican filmmakers have joined demands for information on the whereabouts of 3 missing film students. Relatives of the students joined hundreds of others to protest in Mexico City on Thursday. 3 students were last seen on March 19th in Guadalajara while filming a class project. The Academy Award-winning director Alfonso Cuarón and the cinematographer Emmanuel Lubezki have written an open letter demanding the government find the missing students and take legal action against those involved. And the Academy Award-winning director Guillermo del Toro retweeted several messages to his 1.36 million followers with the hashtags "We are not 3, it's all of us." The residents of the Amazonian city of Barcarena, north of the country, are blaming their illnesses on pollution caused by a Norwegian hydro plant. The community has suffered from diarrhea, stomach pains, and irritated skin. A statement published on the company's website admitted that a local river was contaminated by their actions. The statement said the company discharged untreated rain and surface water into the Para River. A non-profit organization which promotes public health in Brazil confirmed the river contained toxic metals like lead, cobalt, and uranium.
The factory arrived here just to kill us. It is bringing us only destruction and pollution. We are slowly dying. Everything is polluted. Barcarena is all polluted. The soil, the vegetation, everything.
Time now for another short break, but join us again after another look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting. Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has said the escalation of tension between the United States and Russia is becoming worrisome. Guterres admitted that the situation is becoming similar to the one during the Cold War, and it's for this reason that he called on the US and Russia to resolve their differences. But he also said that unlike the Cold War period, there are now multiple independent actors in the world that can now play an important role in guaranteeing the world's stability instead of just two leading powers. Now let's have a look at some other stories making headlines from around the world.
A fire on board a bus in Thailand's western province has killed 20 migrant workers from Myanmar on Friday. The bus was carrying 47 workers who had just crossed the border into Thailand from Myanmar. 3 others on the bus were injured, but the rest escaped unharmed. Thousands of people in the West African nation of Ghana took to the streets of the capital Accra on Wednesday to protest the country's new $20 million defense cooperation deal with the United States. Many in Ghana fear the deal gives Washington too much influence over the country's military. The move comes at a time when Washington is becoming increasingly hostile towards China's rapidly growing influence and investments in Africa. French President Emmanuel Macron has offered to mediate between Turkey and Kurdish-dominated Syrian Democratic Forces in northern Syria. Macron has met with SDF members in Paris and assured them of his support and help in stabilizing northeastern Syria against the Islamic State. Kurdish officials also said Macron had committed to sending troops to the region. In response, Turkish President Tayyip Recep Erdogan said France is completely wrong. A defunct Chinese space lab Tiangong-1 is rapidly falling to Earth. Experts believe it could re-enter our atmosphere between Saturday and Sunday. It was launched in 2011, but the Chinese scientists lost all contact with it in 2016, leading to an uncontrolled fall. The space station is over 10 meters long and weighs more than 8 tons. However, experts believe the chances of it injuring human beings is very slim. It's predicted to fall somewhere in southern Europe.
Our experience is that for such large objects, typically between 20 and 40% of the original mass of 8.5 tons will survive re-entry and then could be found on ground, theoretically. However, to be injured by one of these fragments is extremely unlikely.
A family visiting the renowned Grand Ruaha Safari in Tanzania were met with an unexpected guest in their vehicle. In a video filmed by the guide, a cheetah jumped into their safari video while one of the tourists maintains his calm. Other passengers also remained silent while the cheetah inspected the hood of the vehicle. Or is that the roof? No one was injured in the incident. And finally, the Catholic community around the world is commemorating Holy Thursday and Good Friday. Different ceremonies and rituals celebrate the Passion of Jesus Christ, awaiting his resurrection on Easter Sunday.
Holy Thursday and Good Friday mark 2 of the most important days for Catholics, days which commemorate the sacrifice of Jesus Christ for humankind. In Rome, Pope Francis followed the tradition of washing 12 prisoners' feet on Holy Thursday. 2 Muslims, an Orthodox Christian and a Buddhist, were among the chosen inmates. In the Holy Land, Christians held a procession along the Via Dolorosa in the old city of Jerusalem, retracing what they believe is the route that Jesus Christ took to his crucifixion. They carry wooden crosses and sing hymns while following a man reenacting Jesus. Also, a reenactment of Christ's Passion is played every year in the Philippines. People are nailed on the cross as a sign of faith and repentance. The procession in the southern Mexican city of Taxco is one of the most emblematic in the country. Participants walk barefoot, carry a heavy beam, whips and thorns, and they wear black masks. Also in Spain, processions are held across the country. In southeastern Malaga, members of the Spanish Legion, a militar body, carry an effigy representing Christ of the Good Death while singing an honor anthem. This journey around the Catholic world ends in Syria, where Catholic worshippers celebrate the Holy Week with a mass at Damascus Zaytun Church, followed by a procession.
And that brought us to the end of the news.